I have happy memories of the college for a very long time. So I suppose first memories were when I was about 5, so that would be 1936, which is a long time ago. I remember my father used to ring up when he was finishing his day's work, and he'd walk up the hill from what is now Bishop's House, where the school was, to Martin's house, and I'd go down to meet him on a zigzag path which went down that quite steep hill there. So I knew the college then. It was quite small. And then after the war, when it moved to Bonham Road and grew so much, I visited on a number of occasions during my school and university holidays, flying out for the holiday, and had again many happy memories of what I could see of St Paul's College, which was developing, getting bigger, and getting a very good reputation in the colony then as a very important school of learning. It had very high reputation, I remember, from a number of people who visited. Right, well, the Stewart family has been very involved with St Paul's College for a very long time. Firstly, my grandfather, who wasn't a Stewart, Bishop Lander, was headmaster for a short time, at the same time as he was Bishop of Hong Kong. He then handed over to my uncle, Arthur, who was headmaster for some years, up till 1930, I think. And then he handed over to my father, who was headmaster from about 1930 to the war, and then for some years after the war until he died in 56. So my family has been very involved with St Paul's. Born in Hong Kong, 1931, but when the war came, my mother and I were evacuated to Australia, but my father stayed, both because of keeping the school running as long as possible and because he was a major in the Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps, and he was very involved in the fighting for Hong Kong, and was particularly distinguished at Stong Gap, where his company of only about 100 soldiers held up a Japanese regiment of over 800 soldiers, and he was given a distinguished cross for that work, which is one of the medals on that list of medals you saw out there. And the Japanese recognised it had been a very distinguished operation, because when they capitulated, they gave him that sword I showed you as recognition of what he had done, which is rather nice. But his main job was running the school, which he was very proud of. And when he died, his ashes were buried somewhere in the school grounds, so they're underneath the foundations of the school, which is very appropriate. Initially we lived in what I think is now called Martin House, up the hill from Bishop's House. When the school was in Bishop's House, we lived in the top flat in Martin's house, and some of the masters lived below, and some of the boarders lived below that. And it had a magnificent view across the harbour and the Kowloon Hills, now all gone with all the skyscrapers. But enjoyed it there, and it wasn't until the wartime that the school, after the war, that the school moved to where it is now in Bonham Road. After the war, I came back quite frequently to visit my parents, and they're still there. First time I went was in a flying boat, and it didn't fly at nights. It took 3 days to get to Hong Kong, only flying in the day. But it was great fun. I used to go in the summer to stay with my parents. But my most recent visit, as you rightly pointed out, was about 13 years ago, and the school laid on a special Stewart dinner to remember the involvements in the Stewarts in St Paul's College, which was very nice of them. And I was the guest of honour, I'm told, which was very flattering, at the dinner, and had to make a little speech, which seemed to go down quite well.
I've been to Hong Kong, but only briefly for my work 20 years ago. I did go and visit St Paul's, I think. Yes, I did.
Yes, you did.
And I did a little bit of family history stuff, but not a lot. I only had 2 nights there. Yes, I feel very proud, absolutely, yes. And there's a book, which you probably haven't read, why would you, recently published, about the family and about the massacre of the next generation up. Oh, it's there, the book's there. I'm not going to stand up and bend down, but the book, I'll show you the book, but it's about even the generation above. So Robert and Louisa Stewart, who were missionaries, who were massacred, and then their children are Arthur, etc., and Evan. So yes, the history of the family in that part of the world is fascinating.
The point of the book, which is down there, called Children of the Massacre, is that the parents were killed with some other missionaries, and it was referred to as a massacre, rightly or wrongly. But the point is that all the children chose to come back and teach Chinese in one shape or form or another, which was thought to be rather remarkable when their parents had been killed by the Chinese.
Yeah. So Arthur is the eldest child. Evan is one of the younger. Yeah. But yes, all of the children gravitated back. And then Kathleen, do you know about Kathleen?
She was the wife of Canon Martin, who was headmaster of St Stephen's College.
So she was one of the sisters, Kathleen Stewart. So yeah, all the Stewart family gravitated back to Hong Kong. And then these are, oh God.
That's Arthur on the left.
Arthur,
Philip, James, Mildred,
Kathleen. But then who's that, Daddy? Oh no, that's
James.
James. So it doesn't have Evan or
Herbert, Evan and
Sylvia or Hilda.
Hilda.
She was called. 3
who weren't born then.
Yeah. So there were 9 children in total. Is that right?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's right.
9 children.
9 children.
All of whom came back to Hong Kong.
All those
in
were
one,
alive.
yeah, if they were alive, yes, if they could. If you're interested in our family, which there's no reason why you should be, but if you are, this book is fantastic.
Right.
It's only recently been published by Australian people who we don't know, called the Banks, and they write history of Christian families
in China. Rather nice. When I was there, I'd say last time 13 years ago, I was asked to give a short talk, which I did, and I noticed on the wall were pictures of my grandfather, my uncle. And my father. And I pointed this out to the students, and you can see my involvement with the college on the wall here, the pictures of my grandfather, uncle and father, and they said, whoa! And this thing which we thought was a cake slice, it turns out to be a trowel for putting the last brick in the wall of the medical centre by my mother, and she was given this in memory of that event. She was standing in for the bishop, I think, on that occasion, and Geoffrey Emerson was very excited about this and took the trouble to go and find the building where it now is, and it's no longer the medical centre. I think it's a shop or something now.
Yeah.
But he wrote a little article about it. He was a soldier, but in World War I, he was an undergraduate in Dublin, at a very famous university, Trinity College Dublin, and he was in his second year, but the war was becoming very demanding, and young women went round putting white feathers in the collars of any man who wasn't in uniform, so there was strong pressure on them all to join up, and he joined, although he didn't have to, because undergraduates were not obliged to join up, and he served the latter part of the war, and two of these medals, those two, are World War One. That's the DSO he got for the Wong Nai Chong Gap. That's the OBE, because after the war he organised the Home Guard part of the Hong Kong Defence Force, and these various medals are all since then various Jubilee medals and special service medals and so on. So everybody's rather impressed that he had have so many medals for a man who wasn't a regular soldier. His life's work was a teacher running a school, not a soldier. But I think all the Stewarts, the point made in that book, felt a compulsion to go back and do something helpful to China.
Ah, okay, great.
Did he actually train as a teacher? He didn't do what you currently do today, which is PGCE. He didn't train as a teacher, did he?
No,
But I don't think you had to in those days.
No, but he finished. He went back and finished his degree.
Right.
Because without a proper degree, he wouldn't have been treated seriously as a teacher.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, I think there was definitely, from what you described before, a sort of compunction to go back to Hong Kong and continue in the same vein.
My Uncle Arthur's day, there was some sport, but my father was very keen on it. He was a good sportsman himself, and he pushed hard to get to St Paul's College to have very good teams in a number of sports. But then he was made head of the school sports for the whole of Hong Kong, and therefore then he had to be very careful not to be seen to be favouring his own college. So he had to keep it separate. His running of the thing one side and his promoting it, good sports in St Paul's College on the other. But he managed to get St Paul's to a very high standard in a number of sports. Well, going way back, more than a century back, there was an occasion when St Paul's College team, I think basketball, but I could be wrong, represented Hong Kong, who represented China in some Asian games. But this is going back more than a century. But I can certainly give my very best wishes for the school's future and hope it has a long and successful future.
But I obviously also hope that the school continues to flourish. It's very exciting. It's done 170 years, and I hope that it bodes well for the future and it keeps going from strength to strength.